Part 1. New Beginnings and Suspicious Glances. The first time I saw the apartment was on a bright, sunny morning in late September. The cab dropped me off in front of a moderately aged building, its brick facade exuding a sense of history and warmth amidst the bustling city. I lugged my 2 suitcases up the steps, excitement coursing through me. This was it, the start of my new life in a tech hub. Fresh out of college with my computer science degree in hand and a job at an innovative startup beginning Monday. I had found Aiden's ad on Craigslist, and after a few exchanges, his apartment seemed too good to pass up, right in the heart of the city, affordable, and with a roommate that seemed eerily aligned with my own interests and disposition. Mr. Thompson, the landlord, greeted me at the door with a smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You must be Alex," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to your new home. Aiden's already waiting for you upstairs." The apartment was on the 3rd floor, and as I made my way up, my mind raced with thoughts of my new roommate. We had only communicated through text and emails, yet he seemed like someone I had known for years. He had assured me that he was also in the tech field, loved indie music, and was a weekend warrior at the local gym, practically my mirror image. I knocked on the door, and it swung open to reveal Aiden. He was taller than I had anticipated, with an athletic build and dark hair that fell in a messy style. A warm smile spread across his face as he invited me in. "This is awesome, man. Glad you could finally make it," Aiden enthused, taking one of my suitcases. The apartment was cozy, filled with natural light and surprisingly tidy. Aiden showed me around briefly before leading me to my room. As the days passed, the initial thrill of the new environment began to erode under the weight of Aiden's peculiar behavior. He had an uncanny knowledge about my likes and dislikes, even guessing my favorite obscure band during a casual conversation. It was flattering at first, but soon it felt like he was reading from a script tailored for me. One night, gripped by a mixture of curiosity and unease, I couldn't sleep. I decided to get some water from the kitchen. As I passed by the living room, I noticed the dim glow of Aiden's computer screen. Curiosity got the better of me. Peeking over his shoulder, I saw him immersed in a sea of graphs and textual analysis. My name popped up on multiple instances across the screen. I stood there, frozen, trying to piece together why my personal information, search histories, recent purchases, even private messages, were being fed into some kind of algorithm on Aiden's computer. The realization hit me hard, and a wave of discomfort washed over me. I had signed up for a roommate, not a personal analyst who mined my life for data. As quietly as I had come, I retreated back to my room, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. What was Aiden's endgame? How deep had he dug into my private life? And most importantly, could I still trust the man I was supposed to share a home with? Part 2. Unraveling secrets and making choices. The following days were a blur of disconcerted thoughts and awkward silences. Despite Aiden's persistent attempts to carry on as if nothing was amiss, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being exposed and violated. The once comforting walls of the apartment now felt like they were closing in on me, holding secrets I wasn't meant to know. I knew I had to confront Aiden. The thought alone was enough to knot my stomach, but the unsettling sensation of being watched and analyzed without my consent left me no choice. It was late evening when I finally gathered my courage. Aiden was at his computer, as usual, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across his face. "Aiden, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, an expression of innocent curiosity masking his face. "Sure, what's up?" he replied, turning to face me fully. His calm demeanor only fueled my growing frustration. "Why am I on your computer screen, Aiden? Why are you analyzing my personal data?" The questions tumbled out, each one laced with an accusation. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of panic in Aiden's eyes, quickly replaced by a guise of confusion. "Look, Alex, I can explain," he began, but his words sounded hollow. He spoke of loneliness, past failed co-living experiences, and how he just wanted to ensure we'd get along, to create the perfect roommate scenario using predictive algorithms based on my digital footprint. As he talked, I felt a mixture of pity and horror. The idea that Aiden, in his quest for a harmonious living situation, had crossed so many ethical lines was terrifying. Yet, beneath his misguided actions lay a deeply ingrained human fear. the fear of being alone. Mr. Thompson, our landlord, must have heard the commotion. He knocked gently before entering, his usual warm smile replaced with a look of concern. He listened as we both laid out our sides of the story. "Aiden, what you did was an invasion of privacy. But Alex, I can see this is coming from a place of desperation rather than malice," Mr. Thompson offered, trying to mediate the situation. The room was thick with tension as we spoke, but even Mr. Thompson's well-meaning words couldn't bridge the gap of trust Aiden had broken. Though I tried to see Aiden's actions through a lens of compassion, the betrayal sat too heavily on my heart. That night, as I lay awake in bed, the decision crystallized in my mind. The next morning, I told Aiden and Mr. Thompson I would be moving out. The disappointment in Mr. Thompson's eyes and the pained acceptance in Aiden's were difficult to bear, but I knew this was the only way forward. My trust had been shattered, and no amount of understanding or forgiveness could repair what was lost. As I began packing my belongings, the weight of everything that had transpired hung over me. I was leaving behind not just an apartment and a would-be friend, but also a naive belief in the simplicity of human connections in the digital age. The world felt like a slightly darker place, but perhaps it was a necessary disillusionment, a step towards guarding my privacy and autonomy in an increasingly connected world. Part 3: Reflections and Farewells. The process of packing was more than just the physical act of placing belongings into boxes. It was symbolic, a tangible representation of the decision to move on. Each item I packed, from books to clothes, felt like I was also packing away bits of the life I had hoped to build here. The disappointment wasn't just with Aiden. It was also with myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for being too eager to find a sense of belonging in a new city. Aiden was conspicuously absent as I moved about the apartment, the weight of our last conversation creating an invisible barrier between us. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes, filled with things left unsaid, apologies that would never be voiced, and the understanding that some actions are irrevocable. On the morning of my departure, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Aiden emerged from his room, his usual confidence replaced with a subdued demeanor. We stood there for a moment, two strangers bound by a peculiar and uncomfortable chapter of our lives. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a simple admission, but I could see it cost him a lot to say it. "I know," I replied, "but I have to do this, for both our sakes." Mr. Thompson was there to see me off, offering a sympathetic nod as he helped me with my luggage. The once warm and welcoming landlord now seemed to carry the weight of the situation, a silent observer of the consequences that technological overreach and personal invasion can bring into the simplest of human interactions. Stepping outside, the city greeted me with the same hustle and bustle as when I first arrived, a reminder that life goes on, with or without us. I looked back at the apartment building one last time, a place that had promised new beginnings, but instead taught me a harsh lesson about the complexity of trust and privacy in the digital age. As the taxi drove away, I caught a glimpse of Aiden in the rearview mirror, standing at the doorway, watching as I left. It was a bittersweet ending, a chapter in our lives that had closed as quickly as it had opened. We were both victims and perpetrators in a scenario that was all too common in today's world, where the lines between personal and private often blur. In the quiet of the taxi, I contemplated the future, how to navigate a world where technology promised connectivity, but at what cost. The city flew by in a blur, each street corner a reminder of the endless possibilities and pitfalls that awaited. As the buildings and faces merged into an indistinct panorama, I realized that this experience, for all its pain and betrayal, was a necessary awakening. It was a reminder to cherish real, unfiltered human connections in a world that often feels too digitized, too impersonal. Sitting back, I let the city take me to my next destination, uncertain of what lay ahead, but ready to face it with a newfound understanding and resilience. The incessant clicking of the keyboard under my fingers was the only sound punctuating the otherwise silent night. My small, cluttered room, illuminated only by the dim glow of a single desk lamp and the light from my computer screen, was a sanctuary of sorts. a refuge where the outside world, with all its chaos and demands, could not reach me. I was on the hunt again, not for anything as mundane as game or treasure, but for something far more precious to me: vinyl records. It was on one of these late-night ventures, scrolling through countless listings on Craigslist, that I found it. An ad for a collection of rare vintage records, the likes of which I'd never seen. The excitement that surged through me was almost palpable. My heart raced, my hands shook. I knew I had to have them. The arrangements were made with an anxious haste that left little room for second thoughts. The seller, a man of succinct words, had agreed to the sale, but under one curious condition. The exchange was to take place at his cabin, deep in the woods, far from any semblance of civilization. It should have struck me as odd, but the allure of the records was too strong. My obsession painted the scenario in strokes of adventure rather than danger. When the day arrived, my anticipation masked any sense of foreboding I might have felt. The drive was long, the directions taking me further into the embrace of the wilderness. When the cabin finally came into view, it was less the safe haven I had hoped for and more a relic of another time, isolated and unnerving amidst the dense fog that had begun to settle. The seller, an elderly man with a gravitas that seemed as aged as the records he sold, greeted me at the door. His eyes, a pale blue that seemed almost translucent, held mine with an intensity that made me momentarily uncomfortable. We exchanged pleasantries, though his were laced with a cryptic edge, as if every word carried a weight I was yet to understand. Inside, the cabin was a world trapped in time, walls lined with shelves filled to brimming with records of every imaginable genre. But before we could proceed with the exchange, the seller insisted on sharing tales of the record's origins. Each story seemed more fantastical than the last. Tales of previous owners who vanished without a trace, their obsessions with the melodies leading them down paths from which there was no return. I should have listened, should have heeded the veiled warnings in his stories. Instead, I let my excitement drown out the prudence screaming at the back of my mind. With the transaction complete and the records now mine, the seller surprised me with an offer to listen to one before I departed. Despite the late hour and the ominous fog encapsulating the cabin, I agreed, eager to experience the magic housed within those grooves. As the needle dropped on the record, a haunting melody filled the room, its notes weaving through the air with an otherworldly grace. It was captivating, enchanting, and unsettling. The room seemed to grow colder, the light dimmer, and for a moment I could swear the shadows danced in rhythm with the music. It was then that the first wave of dread washed over me, chilling and profound. I had stepped into a realm far beyond my understanding, ensnared by my own passion. The music had ensnared me, the melodies twisting around my soul like chains. I stumbled, vision blurring as the room spun. Each note was a whisper, a siren call, drawing me deeper into a darkness from which there seemed no escape. As the final chords of the record ebbed away into a chilling silence, a palpable sense of unease settled over me, wrapping its cold fingers around my heart with a vice-like grip. The room, once merely old and musty, now felt charged with a sinister atmosphere, as though the very air had thickened, heavy with unspoken warnings and spectral whispers. I turned to the seller, intending to voice my sudden desire to leave, only to find him gone, vanished as if he, too, were nothing but a figment of the haunting melody. Panic set in as I stumbled towards the door, my earlier fascination replaced by an overwhelming need to escape. But as I stepped outside, the world had transformed. A dense fog enveloped the cabin and the surrounding woods, a white blanket that obscured everything beyond a few feet, turning familiar shapes into grotesque shadows. I ventured into the fog, hoping to find my way back to my car, only to realize with a sinking heart that the path had disappeared. Every direction seemed to lead me back to the cabin, as if the very woods conspired to keep me trapped. Hours seemed to pass as I wandered, lost and disoriented, the seller's cryptic tales echoing in my mind. It dawned on me, with a clarity that cut through the fog, that I had become the protagonist of those cautionary stories, ensnared by my own obsession. The records had not just been objects of desire. They were a lure, drawing in those unable to resist their call, trapping them in a cycle of endless searching and longing. Desperation fueled my steps as I attempted to navigate the confounding maze of trees and mist. Yet, each time, like a cruel joke, I found myself standing before the cabin once more, its windows now glowing with an eerie light. It was in this moment of utter despair that I saw her for the first time, the vision. A spectral figure, her appearance seemed to emanate from the records themselves, a ghostly embodiment of their trapped melodies and tales. She didn't speak, but her presence was a balm to the chaos of my thoughts. Guided by an inexplicable pull, I followed her back into the cabin, to the heart of my terror. It was there, amid the oppressive silence, that realization struck me like a blow. The records, with their haunting melodies, were not merely trapping me in the woods. They were ensnaring my very soul, feeding on my obsession until there would be nothing left of me but a wisp of memory, endlessly searching. Determination replaced fear as I understood what I had to do. The record player, the conduit for the cursed melodies, sat innocuous on the table. With a strength born of desperation, I smashed it, the sound of shattering wood punctuating the heavy air like a gunshot. The act, violent and final, felt like breaking free from chains I hadn't known bound me. As the last echoes of destruction faded, a profound silence enveloped the cabin, as if the world held its breath. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the fog outside beginning to thin, revealing the first light of dawn cresting the horizon. The vision, her purpose fulfilled, vanished, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my obsession and a path to freedom finally clear before me. With the first light of dawn casting its tender glow through the dissipating fog, I stood at the threshold of the cabin, a profound sense of weariness weighing down my limbs. The world beyond the cabin's confines seemed different now, as if my ordeal had peeled away a veil, revealing a reality tinged with shadows formerly unseen. My car, once the steed to my adventurous spirit, now appeared as nothing more than a metal shell, a false promise of freedom. I glanced back at the cabin, its malevolent presence subdued in the morning light, but no less sinister. The shattered remnants of the record player lay scattered on the floor, a testament to my desperate bid for escape. Yet, despite the silence, the melodies of the records lingered, a haunting refrain that echoed not through the air, but within the caverns of my mind. As I began my journey back through the woods, each step taking me further away from the cabin's cursed grasp, a realization settled within me like a stone in water. My escape was not just a physical one. The ordeal had stripped layers from my soul, leaving raw and tender the parts of me that had been touched by the darkness. I understood then that some prisons did not confine the body but the mind, and my escape from the cabin was but the first step in a long road to freedom from the haunting melodies that now resided within me. The drive home was a blur, the landscapes passing by my window mere smudges of color on a canvas of confusion and reflection. My obsession, which had once filled me with a sense of purpose and identity, now seemed a distant memory, a folly born of a desire to fill the voids within with things outside my soul. In the days that followed, the records sat untouched, their once tempting visages now little more than harbingers of a past I wished to forget. I couldn't bring myself to rid them entirely, a part of me still tethered to the obsession that nearly claimed my soul. Instead, they served as a reminder of the night I spent ensnared by their melodies, a cautionary tale of the dangers lurking in the shadows of desire. The world moved on, indifferent to the battle waged in the heart of the woods. Life resumed its relentless march, carrying me along its currents with a new perspective forged in the crucible of my experience. The melodies, though ever present in the recesses of my mind, gradually lost their power, becoming ghosts of echoes, reminders of the night when I danced on the edge of oblivion. Yet, in moments of solitude, when the world's noises faded into silence, I could hear them. Soft, haunting whispers of the records, a siren call to a part of my soul forever lost in their grooves. I realized then that some escapes were not complete, that pieces of myself would always remain in that cabin, trapped in a cycle of desire and despair. And so, I lived, a man touched by shadows, walking the boundary between light and darkness, forever changed by a Craigslist ad that promised vintage records, but delivered a lesson on the nature of obsession. The records, my once treasured collection, served as a monument not to my passion, but to the night I survived the darkest melody of all. the one that sought to claim my very soul.
The city had a way of swallowing you whole, leaving you to navigate its vast, unending labyrinth. It was here, amid the hum of ceaseless activity, that I found myself chasing the echoes of a story that was yet to be told. A story that began, innocuously enough, with a voice recorder. I'd stumbled upon the listing one sleepless night, the glow of my laptop screen, the only light in my modest apartment. It was a simple post on Craigslist, voice recorder for sale, urgent. Driven by an impulsive curiosity and the journalist in me that leaped at anything with the word urgent, I contacted the seller. We met the following day in a crowded cafe where the chatter of patrons dulled our exchange to mere whispers. The seller, a man whose gaunt appearance spoke volumes of untold stories, handed me the device with a trembling hand, his eyes darting around as if pursued by invisible specters. "Never listen to the last recording," he whispered, before vanishing into the sea of anonymity outside. Back in my apartment, surrounded by walls lined with notes and strings intersecting pins across maps, relics of stories pursued and told, I powered on the recorder. The recordings were mundane at first, fragments of someone's daily life. Then I heard it, my name, woven into a tapestry of disjointed whispers and fervent pleas. Confusion swiftly turned to fear, a cold vice gripping my heart as unmistakable details of my life spilled from the speaker. Who was this person? And how did they know me so intimately? The morning sun found me weary from a night spent in the throes of paranoia, every shadow a specter, every noise a whisper from the recorder. I knew that I needed help, but this was a narrative too complex for a single protagonist. My first stop was the local police station, where the fluorescent lights seemed to strip you of any illusion of privacy. Detective Marcus Allen, a man whose experience was etched into the creases of his face and the steadiness of his gaze, listened to my story with an initial skepticism that I couldn't fault him for. As we listened to the recordings together, his skepticism gradually gave way to intrigue. The recordings were a puzzle, each whisper a piece that promised to reveal the bigger picture. If only we could discern its shape. Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to Alex, a friend whose life was a vivid tapestry of code and digital footprints. Their apartment was a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the police station, bathed in the glow of neon lights, the air filled with the hum of computers and the scent of ozone. Together, we dove into the abyss of the internet, searching for any trace of the seller or the previous owner of the voice recorder. Hours slipped into the ether as we chased shadows, the digital echoes of a person who wanted to be found, yet remained elusive. As the night gave way to the pale hues of dawn, we stumbled upon a threadbare clue, an address linked to the seller, leading to a part of the city that even the city seemed to forget. It was a lead, thin as it may be, and as the sun rose, casting long shadows over streets that whispered secrets, I knew that my search was only just beginning. This journey into the unknown was fraught with peril, but the story that awaited me was one that needed to be told. And so, with a recorder that held the key to my own story, I stepped into the light, ready to chase the whispers back into the shadows from whence they came. The address led me to a part of the city where the bright veneer of modernity had long since peeled away, revealing the decay underneath. Buildings stood hunched, their windows like vacant eyes, and the streets wore the silence of abandonment like a heavy cloak. Among them was my destination, an apartment complex that seemed to have absorbed the desolation around it, its facade a mosaic of peeling paint and shattered windows. With each step towards the building, the city's omnipresent hum faded into a distant memory, replaced by the palpable sensation of being watched. The air turned colder, denser, as if the atmosphere itself resisted my intrusion. But driven by a determination that bordered on obsession, I pressed on, my footsteps echoing in the void. Inside, the decay was more pronounced, the walls adorned with graffiti that seemed to narrate the building's slow surrender to time. The dim light did little to dispel the shadows that clung to corners like cobwebs, and the silence was so profound that every breath sounded like a shout. I found the apartment, its door slightly ajar, inviting or warning, I couldn't tell. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into a different realm, one that was untouched by the passage of time outside. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed, and amidst the detritus of a life left behind, I found remnants of the voice that had led me here. Photographs, newspapers, and notebooks filled with the frantic scrawl of obsession. But it was the discovery of a photo, buried under layers of neglect, that chilled me to the bone. A casual snapshot capturing a moment of my life, one I'd hardly remembered, yet there I was, through the eyes of a stalker. The realization was a jolt, propelling me out of the oppressive atmosphere of the apartment and back into the world of the living. The detective was waiting for me outside, his presence a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Together, we delved into the stalker's past, piecing together a narrative from the scraps left behind. The city's archives became our sanctuary, a treasure trove of forgotten stories, amidst which we found his, a tale punctuated by loss, obsession, and a descent into madness that had ensnared me. We traced his steps, following the breadcrumbs of a life spiraling out of control, each revelation a puzzle piece fitting into place, yet none brought solace. It became clear that the recordings were not just the ramblings of a disturbed mind, but a testament to an obsession that had consumed him, spilling over into my world, shadowing my every step. And then the final piece, a police report filed posthumously, detailing the stalker's untimely death, a life cut short before their obsession could reach me. The detective and I stood in the dim light of the archives, the weight of our discovery settling like dust around us. The stalker had been real, his obsession tangible, but he had vanished into the ether, leaving behind recordings that echoed in the hollows of my mind. As I walked out into the sunlight, the city seemed to have shifted around me, familiar yet forever altered. I carried with me the knowledge of the stalker's existence and demise, a ghost story where the ghost had been all too real, his whispers a haunting melody in the symphony of the city. The city, once a sprawling maze of mysteries waiting to be unraveled, now felt like an intricate web of truths and shadows. At the heart of this web was the voice recorder, my constant companion through a journey that had led me from curiosity to the brink of obsession. It had been a mirror, reflecting back a story that was mine yet not mine, whispered in a voice from beyond the grave. The days following my dive into the archives were tinged with a surreal quality, as if I was walking through a dream. The detective had offered a semblance of closure, suggesting that with the stalker's death, the specter of those recordings should fade into memory. But how does one free themselves from the hold of a voice that had known you, yet you had never known? It was in the sanctity of my apartment, surrounded by the fragments of the story I had chased, that I found my answer. The voice recorder lay on my desk, silent now, its secrets laid bare. My laptop blinked awake at my touch, a blank document, open and waiting. This was my catharsis, my way to unburden the weight of a stranger's obsession, a story that demanded to be told. The words flowed, a torrent that had been dammed up for too long. I wrote of the initial curiosity, the unnerving discovery of the recordings, the descent into the stalker's world, and the chilling realization of his presence in my life. I wrote of the detective, a steadfast ally in a sea of uncertainty, and of Alex, whose prowess with technology had illuminated the digital shadows. But most of all, I wrote of the voice, a spectral presence that had hovered at the edge of my consciousness, driving me to the edge and back. The article was published amidst a flurry of interest, its words echoing across the city's digital landscape, finding resonance in the hearts and minds of those who read it. The response was immediate, a chorus of voices that shared their own tales of whispers in the dark, of being watched from the shadows. It was a testament to the unseen connections that bind us, a reminder that for every story told, countless others lay hidden, waiting. In the aftermath, my apartment felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere that had clung to it dispelled by the act of sharing my story. The voice recorder, once a harbinger of fear, now lay silent, a relic of a chapter in my life that had drawn to a close. Yet the city outside continued its eternal dance, indifferent to the dramas that unfolded within its embrace. As I stood at my window, looking out at the myriad of lives intersecting and diverging below, I realized that the story I had been a part of was but a single thread in the intricate tapestry of the city. The stalker, who had believed he was the weaver of my fate, had instead become a footnote in my narrative, a shadow that had passed over the sun, leaving no trace behind. In the end, it wasn't the voice recorder or the stalker's obsession that defined me, but my resilience in the face of the darkness that had sought to envelop me. I had emerged from the shadows, my story a beacon for those who had felt the chill of unseen eyes upon them, a voice that whispered of strength, survival, and the enduring light that exists within us all. The message pinged into my inbox as if destiny itself had orchestrated its arrival. After months of fruitless job hunting, the gleam of hope was almost blinding. The subject line read, "Final interview invitation. A life-changing opportunity awaits." My heart skipped. The job description was vague, but promised a lucrative salary and the chance to be part of an innovative, high-profile project. The conditions were peculiar, sure, but desperation isn't a breeding ground for skepticism. I followed the instructions to the letter. Encrypted emails, bizarre but seemingly benign tasks, and finally the directions to the final interview location, an abandoned office complex on the outskirts of town. The setting sun painted the sky in ominous hues as I approached the desolate building. Its towering silhouette loomed, a silent guardian of forgotten stories. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the chill of the evening air, but from a creeping sense of foreboding. Stepping into the dimly lit foyer, the door creaked shut behind me, its echo dancing along the walls. The building seemed to breathe, each exhale a whisper of the unknown. My footsteps echoed on the tiled floor, a lonely sound in the cavernous space. This was it, the culminating moment of all my efforts. Yet as I advanced, a gnawing sensation tugged at my insides, whispering that not all was as it seemed. The initial interview room was stark, the only illumination a single overhead light that cast long shadows across the floor. There, shrouded in darkness, stood the interviewer, a figure cloaked in mystery. Their voice, altered electronically, cut through the silence. "We've been expecting you. Let's begin, shall we?" Their questions started typically enough, but soon delved into unsettling territories, probing at the edges of my fears. Time lost meaning as the interview spiraled into a bizarre assessment of my psyche. It wasn't until I attempted to leave, finding the exit mysteriously sealed, that panic truly set in. The door, once an unremarkable exit, stood as an impenetrable barrier, its surface cold and unyielding. Confusion gave way to a chilling realization. I was not just an applicant here. I was a pawn in a game with rules yet to be disclosed. The building's corridors twisted and turned, leading me through a labyrinthine sprawl that seemed to warp and stretch with each step. It was in this maze that I encountered the first true test, a room designed to exploit my deepest fear, isolation. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging the space into darkness. A voice, disembodied and chillingly familiar, echoed around me. "Let's see how you handle being truly alone." Panic clawed at my chest, a visceral response to the enveloping blackness. The air felt heavy, charged with an intangible dread. Yet, amidst the rising tide of fear, a spark of defiance flickered to life. I was not going to succumb to the darkness, both literal and metaphorical, that sought to consume me. With each breath, I steadied my resolve, reminding myself that fear was a construct of the mind, a barrier to be overcome. This was but the first ordeal in a night that promised many more. But in facing it, I would forge the first link in the chain of my escape, an escape not just from this room, but from the labyrinth that held me captive. The darkness was absolute, a dense cloak that seemed to swallow every ounce of hope. But the silence was worse. It magnified each breath, each heartbeat, into a deafening cacophony. It was in this void, edged by despair and fear, that I discovered not all was lost. A faint glow, a lifeline in the suffocating black, pulsed softly from a corner of the room. Approaching it, I found a phone, its screen illuminating a message from an unknown sender. "Use what you know. Fear is the mind's prison." It was cryptic, yet it sparked a flicker of understanding. Whoever sent this knew the game's rules, perhaps even how to break them. Emboldened, I sought to unravel the trap. This room, designed to prey on my claustrophobia and fear of isolation, could be a crucible for transformation if I confronted its challenge head-on. Drawing deep from my background in psychology, I began to dissect my fear, breaking it down to its root causes, understanding it, and ultimately reducing its hold over me. It wasn't easy. Every shadow seemed to whisper doubts, every silence a promise of failure. Yet the message was a beacon, guiding me through the psychological mire. The door eventually unlocked, not with a click, but with a realization. Fear had been the lock, and my mind, the key. Stepping into the corridor, the game's sinister nature unfurled further, yet now I carried the beginnings of an armor forged from self-realization. The corridors led me to the next trial, a room that mirrored a scene from my past I'd struggled to forget. Enveloped in the dim light was an exact replica of my childhood home's living room, during the stormy night when terror had first truly sunk its claws into me. The memory of feeling helpless and alone washed over me, but this time, the fear felt distant, diluted by the understanding that this was another psychological snare. The mentor's words echoed, a reminder that these fears could be navigated, understood, and overcome. Through the chilling reenactment, the specter of past traumas began to fade, diminishing under the scrutiny of an emboldened self-awareness. The ordeal was a perverse therapy, forcing confrontation with inner demons, and in doing so, granting a measure of control over them. The final confrontation awaited in the heart of the maze, where shadows played on the walls, twining with the remnants of fear still clinging to me. There, the interviewer's figure emerged from the dark, no longer an omnipotent tormentor, but a final hurdle in this twisted psychological gauntlet. Their voice, once a harbinger of dread, now spurred defiance. Armed with insights gleaned through every twisted trial, I faced them, not as a victim, but as an equal adversary in this dark game of minds. The climax of our confrontation wasn't marked by physical struggle, but by a battle of wits and wills. Drawing upon every lesson learned, every fear confronted, I turned the tables, using my understanding of psychology not just as a shield, but as a weapon. My words, carefully chosen and aimed, targeted the interviewer's own insecurities, hidden beneath layers of control and manipulation. The power dynamics shifted, the captor's facade crumbling under the weight of their own unacknowledged fears. As the final word was spoken, the interviewer vanished into the shadows from which they had emerged, leaving behind an eerie silence. The complex's daunting maze lay silent and defeated, its corridors no longer a prison, but a path leading toward freedom. The dawn was breaking, a new day heralding the end of the night's horrors and the beginning of a journey back to a world forever altered by the night's ordeal. My apologies, but it seems there was a misunderstanding in the structuring of the tasks, as only 7 detailed action beats were outlined previously, and accordingly, the narrative culminated with the 6th beat. Nonetheless, I'll proceed to conclude the story based on the existing structure. Emerging from the darkness, the first light of dawn kissed the horizon, its gentle glow a stark contrast to the shadows that retreated with the night. The once imposing office complex stood silent behind me, its corridors and rooms now just a backdrop to a trial that had tested the very limits of my psyche. The ordeal was over, but its echoes would linger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit when faced against the abyss. As I stepped out into the breaking day, the cool morning air felt like a balm to my weary soul. Freedom was not just absence of confinement. It was the liberation from the chains of fear that had sought to bind me. The night's trials had peeled back the layers of my consciousness, forcing me to confront my deepest insecurities and emerge not unscathed but undeniably stronger. Yet, as the world around me awakened, the boundaries between the harrowing experience and the reality I returned to blurred. People passed by, caught in the throes of their daily routines, unaware of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the ordinary. I was one of them once, naive to the depths to which the mind could descend or soar in its quest for survival. The mentor, a guiding light through the labyrinthine ordeal, remained an enigma, his motivations, his identity, shrouded in mystery. Perhaps he was the unsung hero of countless such trials, or maybe another soul who had navigated the darkness and sought to light a candle for those who followed. His final message was simple yet profound. Remember, fear thrives in darkness, but so does hope. In the aftermath, the mundane no longer felt ordinary. Every shadow held a story, every light a potent reminder of the darkness it dispelled. The experience had carved into me a profound understanding of the fragility and strength of the human psyche, how easily it could be manipulated, and yet how resilient it could be in the face of unspeakable terror. As I melded into the crowd, the office complex a fading silhouette in the distance, the scars of the night served as silent guardians of my psyche, a reminder of the ordeal endured and the victory earned. The job I had sought was a facade, but the role I had unwittingly auditioned for and triumphed in was that of a survivor. The final interview had concluded, but the lessons gleaned from its twisted curriculum would shape the narrative of my life forevermore. In the end, the true interview was not for a job, but for the right to reclaim my peace, to face the world with a gaze that had stared into an abyss and found within it the strength to endure. And as the sun climbed higher, dispelling the last of the shadows, I knew that while the darkness might return, it would find me unyielding, forever changed, and forever vigilant.
I've always been the kind of person who finds solace in the little things. My apartment, with its cramped spaces and overflowing shelves, was a mosaic of memories, each object a testament to a life lived on the edge of poverty and passion. It was amidst this chaos, under the dim light of a lone bulb, that I found myself staring at the watch, my mother's watch, a relic from a past that seemed both a lifetime away and as close as yesterday. Tonight, it wasn't just an heirloom, it was a lifeline. The rent was overdue, and the pantry was nearly empty. The ad I typed up on Craigslist was simple, devoid of the emotional weight the watch carried. A few clicks later, it was out there, an offer to the world, or at least to anyone willing to pay enough for me to get through the month. The response came quicker than I expected. A message notification broke the silence of the room, its abruptness startling me. The buyer, Mr. Grayson, was concise, his words typed with an efficiency that felt almost cold. His offer was more than generous. It was a small fortune to someone in my shoes. But it was his insistence on meeting at his place, a house shrouded in as much mystery as his brief messages, that planted the first seed of unease. Still, desperation has a way of silencing doubt. The following evening found me driving through a fog so dense it felt like moving through another world. As Mr. Grayson's house loomed out of the mist, a chill crawled up my spine. It stood there, an anachronism against the backdrop of modernity, its silent facade watching like an ancient sentinel. I hesitated, my hand on the car door, as a voice in my head screamed to drive away. But the weight of the watch in my pocket, heavy with history and need, anchored me there. Mr. Grayson greeted me at the door. He was tall, his posture rigid, dressed in a suit that seemed to belong to another era. His eyes, sharp and piercing, gave nothing away as he beckoned me inside. The interior of the house was as timeless as its owner, each room a carefully curated collection of antiquities. But it was the air of the house that unsettled me the most. It was as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. As Mr. Grayson led me to a sitting room, the fog outside seemed to thicken, wrapping the house in a cocoon of isolation. I realized with a start that I couldn't hear any sounds from the outside world. No distant hum of traffic, no rustling of leaves, just silence. A silence so profound it felt like we were cut off from reality itself. Sitting across from Mr. Grayson, the watch between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into a story from which there might be no return. I was right, of course, but not in a way I could have ever predicted. The watch sat on the table, glinting under the room's dim light, an artifact out of time that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Mr. Grayson's gaze lingered on it, and then unsettlingly shifted to me. It was a look that bore weight, a silent demand to unveil stories buried deep. Without warning, he began to recount tales tied to the watch that only my mother and I knew. How? The question died on my lips, unspoken but screaming in my mind. His voice was a tranquil storm, weaving narratives that threaded through the fabric of my life with unnerving accuracy. As the room seemed to close in, he leaned forward, his words dropping like stones in still water. I'm not interested in the watch, Alex. I'm interested in what it represents, the memories it holds. Panic unfurled within me, a living thing clawing its way up my throat. I rose to leave, the need to escape overriding everything else. But the door through which I had entered was gone. replaced by walls that seemed to mock my confusion. Thus began the nightmarish odyssey through Mr. Grayson's house, a maze that defied logic and reality. Corridors twisted into themselves, rooms led to other points in time, and staircases spiraled into nothingness. The house was alive, breathing and pulsating, reshaping its innards to confound my escape. In my heart, a terror grew, fed by the unyielding strangeness of the place, and the realization that I was trapped in a game whose rules were as shifting as the walls around me. Despite my efforts, each attempt to flee only brought me back to the sitting room, where Mr. Grayson waited with the patience of a spider in the center of its web. Exhaustion gnawed at my edges, both mental and physical, as I collapsed into the chair opposite him for the umpteenth time. It was then, in a voice that threaded through the despair wrapping its chains around my heart, Mr. Grayson made his final offer. Freedom, he claimed, could be mine, but at a cost no currency could cover. He wanted a memory, my most cherished one, linked to the watch. The essence of the offer, its sheer audacity and horror, clawed at my sanity. How could one trade a memory as if it were a commodity? Yet the house's oppressive atmosphere, its labyrinthine trap, left me drowning in hopelessness. Tears unbidden trailed down my cheeks as images of my mother, her laughter, and the warmth of her embrace enveloped my mind. Those memories were sacred, inviolable. Yet here I was, contemplating the inconceivable. With a heavy heart, born from desperation and the primal need for freedom, I nodded. Words failed me, but my silence spoke volumes. Mr. Grayson's eyes, twin voids of inscrutable depth, acknowledged my surrender. No ritual marked the exchange, no spell was cast, yet the moment I acquiesced, a part of me fractured, its pieces drifting away on a tide I could neither see nor understand. I was adrift, disconnected from a piece of my soul, yet eerily I found my way unobstructed, the house's once impenetrable maze now as benign as the rooms of my own apartment. Stepping out into the night, the cool air felt both alien and familiar against my skin. The fog had lifted, and with it, the oppressive cloak that had shrouded Mr. Grayson's home. Yet, as I drove away, the emptiness inside grew, a void where once there had been light. Jamie paced her living room, glancing at the clock for the umpteenth time. Alex should have been back hours ago. A knot of worry tightened in her stomach as she dialed their number again, only to be greeted by the void of an unanswered call. Clutching her phone, she made a decision fueled by a mix of fear and determination. If the world wouldn't bring Alex back to her, she would venture into the abyss to retrieve them. The police were of little help, their assurances as empty as the reassurances she kept giving herself. Undeterred, Jamie took it upon herself to retrace Alex's steps, her search leading her to the edge of town, where rumors of a house that wasn't bound by the laws of nature or time whispered among the locals. As she approached the rumored location, the fog, like a living entity, seemed to recoil, revealing nothing but empty land. Mr. Grayson's house, like the man himself, had vanished into the night, leaving no trace except for the lingering chill in the air that seemed to mock her efforts. Bereft of leads and hope, Jamie returned to the city, the weight of her failure a heavy chain around her heart. It was with a mixture of relief and dread that she found Alex standing outside their apartment building, looking lost and profoundly alone. The reunion was a quiet affair, marked by silent tears and tight embraces. Words were unnecessary. The relief of having Alex back was enough for Jamie. Yet as the night grew old and the adrenaline faded, a deeper, more concerning change in Alex became apparent. Alex sat on the couch, the watch cradled in their hands, a far-off look in their eyes. Jamie sat beside them, her presence a silent question. It was only when Alex tried to speak of their ordeal, to recount what had transpired in Mr. Grayson's house, that the true cost of their freedom became heartbreakingly clear. With each attempt to remember, Alex's confusion grew. Details slipped through their grasp like water, leaving behind only the echo of something profoundly lost. The watch, once a beacon of their mother's love and memory, was now just a thing of gears and glass. Jamie listened, her heart breaking, as Alex struggled with the void where once lay the warmth of their most cherished memory. In the days that followed, Jamie became Alex's anchor, a steadfast presence as they navigated a world that had shifted on its axis. They were lost, adrift in a sea of confusion, grasping for memories that flitted at the edge of consciousness, always just out of reach. Together, they embarked on a journey to fill the spaces left behind, crafting new memories to patch the gaping holes in the tapestry of Alex's past. It was a slow process, marked by frustration and tears, but also moments of unexpected joy and laughter. But no matter how many new memories they created, the watch remained, a symbol of a sacrifice too steep, a reminder of what had been traded in a moment of desperation. Yet in its silent ticking, there was also a testament to survival, to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss. As they moved forward, Jamie and Alex found strength in their shared vulnerability, their bond deepened by the scars of their ordeal. And while the shadows of that night in Mr. Grayson's house would always linger, they faced the future not with fear, but with a quiet defiance, their love a beacon in the darkness, guiding them home.